What's up, heathens? How ya doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today we're going to be taking a look at Apologetics Squared, which is another animated explainer video channel. Today they're going to be talking about arguments from beauty that supposedly prove that God exists. I'm not sure if a preference can be used to prove that a God exists, but this guy is going to try. If you want to know why beauty is just a chemical reaction in your brain and cannot be used to prove God, then please stay tuned. Alright, before we get into this video today, I want you to know that you can go and get your own Got Evidence shirt by visiting the link in the description or just by going to gotevidenceshirt.com. You can go there and get this shirt as well as look at the other shirts that I have in the Godless Engineer store on Teespring. So if you want your own God Evidence shirt, go there now and get it. Alright, let's get into his video.
The arguments from beauty for the existence of God. That's right, we're not discussing an argument, but 5 different ways beauty can be used to argue that God exists.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Unsuccessfully arguing for God's existence. Because beauty is a dopamine response in your brain that causes a sense of pleasure. Everybody will have different things that trigger this kind of sense of pleasure. This is just part of the human experience.
Jumping into things, the first argument goes like this. Look at the trees, man. There must be a God. Now, this isn't really an argument in the traditional sense because, well, it doesn't have premises that we can argue about. It's really just mysterious and mystical. Nonetheless, many find this to be quite persuasive, myself included. But I personally prefer non-mysterious arguments that can be analyzed logically, so let's move on to some of those.
This is not an argument at all. I don't know why people are convinced by the "look at the trees" type of rhetoric, or why some apologists like this guy and Braxton Hunter like it at all. It literally makes no sense because beauty is not absolute or objective in any kind of sense. Alright, I'm gonna predict using my Miss Cleo powers that none of these arguments are going to sufficiently prove that God exists. And the reason why I don't think any of them are going to work is because without God, beauty would still exist. People could still experience beauty. But without someone, whether or not they're human or otherwise, to experience this sensation, beauty would not exist.
The second argument is based on the nature of beauty itself. Many incredibly varied things have the mysterious property of beauty. Plants, abstract objects, or the character of individuals just scratches the surface of the diversity of beauty.
Which is all subjectively determined by the observer to be beautiful. What is beautiful to one person may be ugly or bland to another. This is perfectly explained chemically because everybody's emotions are triggered by different things. These emotions are what our brain experiences when chemicals like serotonin and dopamine flood our neural receptors. If you have a natural explanation for why something happens, then you don't need to suggest a supernatural explanation to further explain it.
Now, to have a good argument, we need to get from these things have the property of beauty to God exists. We could do this by mirroring the structure of the moral argument, which goes from things have the property of being moral to God exists.
If you're going to model any argument off the moral argument for God, you're going to have a bad time. Because the moral argument is very bad. The moral argument makes the assumption that absolute morals exist. The argument fails to realize that morality requires a mind to exist. Just like with beauty, morals exist without a God, but they cannot exist without someone to hold them.
William Lane Craig's formulation of the moral argument goes like this. If God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist, but objective moral values do exist, therefore God exists.
Objective here should really be absolute because that's what Craig means. You can be objective about morals, but morals themselves cannot be objective. So whenever you hear an apologist say objective morality, what they really mean is absolute morality, which is a ridiculous concept. Even within Christianity, you do not find an absolute moral foundation. The Christian set of morals have changed over the span of its history, demonstrating the subjectivity of morality. This just goes to show that morality is inherently subjective.
Now, I've explained elsewhere that I'm not a huge fan of that formulation, and instead prefer constructing the moral argument thusly. We can now repurpose this and get a pretty good argument from beauty. This argument, put simply, is saying that if there is such a thing as beauty, which is a real feature of reality, then this cries out for some sort of deeper or more fundamental explanation. But if we try to imagine any theory of this deeper explanation, it always seems to work better with the existence of God. You could ground beauty in the nature of God, or the will of God, or in the properties of natures instantiated by God. And since the existence of God works so well with providing an explanation for the nature of beauty, then God probably exists.
You serious?
Oh, man. Alright, well, point 1 seems perfectly reasonable. Albeit, it doesn't really do anything for you. Point 2 through 4 is kind of fuckered, though. You're gonna need to do something else with these mangy-ass things, because they will not hold shit up. Beauty is not more than preference. Things are not inherently beautiful. We experience beauty as an emotional reaction to stimuli. Looking at things objectively, one collection of atoms is really no different than another collection of atoms. It's our human experience that allows us to have this sense of beauty.
Now, the premise I expect to get the most attack would be premise 2. The skeptic could maintain that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Now, you can indeed maintain that, but you need to recognize that this actually relatively modern notion goes against all our intuitions.
Say what? The subjectivity of beauty is a modern notion? Sure, some cultures in the past may have created standards for what they consider to be beautiful. But the fact that these standards have changed so many times over the span of history is proof that beauty, like morality, is inherently subjective.
Sure, our tastes and ability to recognize beauty do vary from individual to individual, but nothing has any beauty in it? That seems quite hard to swallow.
Well, when you stop seeing beauty as an inherent quality that something has and realize that it's an experience that someone has, you can swallow that shit just fine. Nothing is inherently beautiful in this world, and that's perfectly okay. Sure, most people would agree that a sunrise and sunset are beautiful. Just because most people have that experience does not mean that sunrises and sunsets are inherently beautiful. A really good example of this would be math. Now, while KC would rather gouge out her eyes than see a math problem, I find math to be insanely beautiful.
The third argument is based on our sense of beauty. Let's ask, why do humans perceive that beauty exists?
Scientific studies have shown that increased activity in the medial orbital frontal cortex, also associated with decision-making and other pleasure experiences, coupled with a release of dopamine, are what happen when we experience this sense of beauty. This makes beauty part of the pleasure spectrum and is individually experienced by people. This is why nothing is inherently beautiful, and beauty is only an experience that is felt by someone. If you have a natural explanation for why something happens, then you don't need to suggest a supernatural explanation to further explain it.
Now, a naturalistic answer would be that our sense of beauty is a product of evolution, geared towards promoting our survival. Things like good food or healthy partners should be attractive to us, so we find them beautiful.
I wouldn't say any of that is true. The idea of an ideal mate has always been dependent on the selection pressures that exist in the environment. While beauty may be a factor in sexual selection, it isn't always. Like I've said this entire video, beauty is an experience felt by a person, and is therefore inherently subjective. Outside of beauty's possible role in sexual selection, I don't really see beauty being a big factor in selecting what kind of food we eat, or anything else. I'd rather go the more scientific route and admit that beauty is a chemical reaction that we experience in our brains because of how our brains evolved.
Now, this answer has problems. Many dangerous things are beautiful, like scenic cliffs or dangerous animals are beautiful. and things like beautiful abstract objects seem useless as far as evolution is concerned. But all that aside, the more important point is that God also wants humans to survive, so any non-theistic explanations of why humans perceive beauty would also be a theistic explanation for why God would allow beauty. But on top of that, theists can also add theological reasons, such as the goodness of beauty, or how beauty draws people to God.
Wait, how does beauty draw people to God? Does it do this by making them feel a sense of awe and wonder? You realize that these are experiences that we definitely know are chemical reactions in our brain. They do not indicate anything about a God. Of course, you would just move the goalpost again like you did here. You'd say that we can only experience beauty because God made us that way. I don't feel like moving the goalpost is all that convincing. It just seems like I was able to diminish the gap that your God lives in, and now he just lives in a smaller gap.
So theism will necessarily be better at explaining why humans perceive the existence of beauty.
No, it doesn't. You can't just use a God of the gaps argument and then proclaim that it explains shit better. You've just put a placeholder there until we can discover more information.
The fourth argument is almost a combination of the previous two, the knowledge of beauty. There is objective beauty in the things around us, and we have beliefs that these things are beautiful. But how does the beauty present in these objects actually inform our beliefs? The beauty itself of the object cannot be detected by any physical measurements, so our sense of beauty is sensing something purely undetectable.
Yeah, it's undetectable because objects are not inherently beautiful. Also, are you seriously telling me right now that beauty is undetectable but we can detect it? That makes it fucking detectable! At this point, are you even listening to yourself? And again, beauty is a pleasure experience that is controlled by the chemicals in our brain. It's a reaction to dopamine being released. It inherently cannot be absolute in any sense because it requires a mind to experience it.
But for us to truly know that there is beauty in things, the beauty and our belief in the beautiful need to somehow be connected. How do we explain this? Well, evolution is a purely physical process, so it can't really help explain why we perceive something physically undetectable. Besides, evolution would gladly make us perceive ugly things as beautiful if that promoted our survival.
Well, for one, there are plenty other organisms on this planet that survive just fine without a sense or knowledge of beauty. Our experience of beauty may play a role in sexual selection, but outside of that context, I don't really see it being all that beneficial. At least in the ways that you're describing. You yourself have pointed out several ways in which beauty can be detrimental to the survival of a species. I really don't think that straw-manning arguments against you is a good idea. Our sense of beauty is definitely a physical and chemical process. That completely explains our experience of beauty.
On the other hand, God would have no problem knowing what is beautiful given his omniscience, and as the designer of our cognitive faculties, could make us in such a way that our perceptions of beauty generally matched up with what is actually beautiful.
That would make sense if everybody experienced beauty over the same things. That's not what happens though. Not everyone finds a sunrise or sunset beautiful. Casey would rather be blind than look at a Fibonacci sequence. But a more important question here is, what about those that don't experience emotions like everybody else? If God made our cognitive faculties, why did he decide to fuck these people over? These conditions are easily explained physically, but once you throw God into the mix, especially your kind of God, it makes things really, really complicated. Your assertion that God did it only causes more questions than it answers.
The fifth argument is based on the sheer beauty of our world. From hot deserts to cold Arctics, from giant galaxies to microscopic structures, our world is filled with beauty.
None of that is inherently beautiful.
Now, theism makes perfect sense of this. God, being maximally great, would want a beauty-filled world. Absent a God, one would have little to no reason to predict the sheer amount of beauty around us. Therefore, the beauty in the world is evidence for God.
This thought process seems incredibly primitive. Basically, ignore everything that we know about the experience of beauty and proclaim that beauty only exists because of magic? We already don't need a god to explain why we experience beauty. So I don't know why you would suggest that absent a god, we wouldn't be able to explain why people experience beauty. This just sounds like a non sequitur argument that doesn't make any kind of sense at all. I also like how you're assuming the goals of God at this point. You can't possibly know what his goals are if he were to exist. You could interpret all this from the Bible, but that's hardly representative of reality. I feel like in order to really argue this point, you would have to pull from a very specific definition of a God. I know that your Christian version of God definitely doesn't exist, and that's because the Bible does not comport with reality.
Now, this raises a question. What about the problem of ugliness? Shouldn't a god want to eradicate all ugliness? But we do find ugliness. Therefore, there isn't a god.
Well, considering, according to Christianity, God created this world perfect, and then women fucked it up, seems like women are responsible for all the ugliness in the world. Damn! I'm not saying this. The Bible is. I think ugliness is perfectly explained by physical processes. Just like beauty. We don't really need a god to tell us that we're responsible for the ugliness in the world.
Now, the problem with this argument is that there's an asymmetry to the use of beauty and ugliness. Sometimes individual pieces of ugliness are used in an artwork to create an overall more beautiful piece of art. If God designed the whole universe to work together to bring about great beauty, then it's completely consistent that certain sections of it would be ugly. So from our limited reference frame, everything we see is still very consistent with our universes being a product of a maximally great artist.
This kind of assumes that God created a flawed universe from the start. So is your position that the Genesis account is not true? That God didn't create the universe perfectly, but that he intended to create this universe flawed? I also love how you've drawn out a special pleading argument, but fail to realize it's special pleading.
Before ending, I want to note an argument pushed by Alvin Plantinga to that effect. Plantinga argues that possible worlds where God becomes incarnate and atones for his creatures are very good worlds, maybe even good enough to justify the evil of the fall, which is a necessary condition for this good. Roughly the same argument could be offered as a possible explanation to the ugliness in the world. The overall narrative of our entire universe is immensely beautiful, precisely because it includes the ugliness introduced by the fall.
Well, my takeaway from this part is that God required humans to fall from grace. This just seems like a toxic fucking plan to subject your creations to. First, you're going to create them perfect, because you know they're going to fuck up and eat some fruit. You then have to guilt them for thousands of years for being the worst things you ever created. Until, miraculously, one day you send yourself as your son to die on a cross and absolve them of their fuck-ups just so that you can go back to heaven and lounge in your lazy boy. This literally makes no sense as an argument for God or Christianity. Alright, well that was the 5 arguments from beauty that supposedly prove that God exists. I found them to be very underwhelming. They were not impressive at all. The argument from beauty, in whatever particular form you want to give it, is still a bad argument. I don't feel like this video substantiated any of the claims that it made, and I think that it ignored all of our scientific knowledge about our human experience. I really don't think any argument that ignores the vast amount of information we've already been able to collect will ever be able to actually prove that God exists. But I'd love to hear what you guys think, so let me know down below in the comments with what you thought about this guy's video. Do you think that his arguments were really good, or do you consider them to be really bad? Let me know down below in the comments, and hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens!